Hello, everybody, and welcome to the User Research Strategist podcast. I am your host, Nikki Anderson, and I am joined here by the amazing Anne Charlotte today. And we are going to be talking about adaptability in our field, which is a big one. We have a lot of fun topics to cover today. But before we dive in, Anne Charlotte, do you mind just giving a quick introduction on yourself to the audience?
Hello everyone. Thank you, Nikki. Thanks for having me. I have over 12 years of research experience, starting in academia and then moving to applied research. So first in humanitarian work, where I spent, I think, about a decade, and now in tech for the past 5 years. I work at PayFit now as a senior UX researcher. PayFit is a B2B SaaS company that provides SaaS to simplify payroll and HR management. I'm a mom. I have two adorable girls. I'm French, and it's been 5 years now that we are based in Barcelona, which is starting to be a long period compared to the other place I've lived. I've often moved to between different regions and countries, and it really shaped me who I am. And I think that I really enjoy meeting different people with different cultures, different backgrounds, because I think it makes you really realize that the world is bigger than your own perspective, that there are so many different factors that influence how people behave. And I think it's also super important in research. It gives you this humility to understand that there is no such thing as absolute truth. I've always been drawn to geopolitics and social justice, probably because I thought that it was a good way to have impact to improve people's life. So naturally oriented my studies in that direction, wanting to do something meaningful. So I studied political sciences and sociology. And then I deep dive into understanding the role of education in emergency contexts. This is when I did my PhD. It was a great experience because it was really a PhD on the field. I was mainly in Côte d'Ivoire, so working in post-conflict situation. I collaborated with so many different stakeholders. I learned everything there. Yes, this diversity really marked me. I think it's when I really truly understood in research that everyone has something to contribute, that each story is unique. And also it's super important in research that we need to honor each perspective and then step back to understand the big picture in the most objective manner, of course. And now here I am in tech, which might seem like a complete change, but you'd be surprised how much this experience overlap in a way.
Amazing. You've done some really cool things, and it sounds like diversity, not only in the story of how you've moved around and experienced different cultures and how important that is, but also within the scope of your work, how important it is to understand all these different perspectives and all these different people, and how we, as you said really nicely, should honor each story and honor each person. And that's I'm sure, such a gift to have and such a wonderful skill for you to have as a user researcher. And I'd love to dive into exactly, yeah, how did you manage that transition? Because it does sound quite different to go from that more humanitarian work and completely pivot into something like tech.
Yeah, it is good too. But it's not the most traditional career path, I must admit. But the most difficult thing was to accept the change, I would say. For 10 years, humanitarian work it wasn't just a job, it was really my life, my whole life, my dream when I was younger. And then I lived with my colleagues, I shared every meal, we breathed and lived together almost every day. We were all very passionate because every decision mattered, because lives were at stake. So there I worked as an analyst when I was in the humanitarian sector. But getting that first field job was really tough. It was such a competitive sector that I even had eventually to hide my PhD for several years because people saw it as too academic, even though I did all my research in the field. So it was really, really difficult. I had to fight to get this experience. So then the life surprised me in the best way. I got pregnant. My recall made me rethink everything because starting a family in a conflict zone wasn't really an option, even though I really loved my job and I fought so hard to get it. So I had to make a tough choice, say goodbye to that career. So we went to Barcelona because my husband had an opportunity there. And I did what researchers do best, research. So during my kind of maternity leave, I discovered tech, this emerging job by talking with dozens of professionals. It was really emerging 5 years ago in Europe. So I talked with really dozens of professionals. I learned everything I could about UX research for a couple of months only, not a lot of time. I must admit, because my husband is in tech, and when we had a discussion, we were like complete strangers about work. Me working on the humanitarian passion field, him talking about tech, front-end, back-end, MVP, API, all this was like a complete foreign language. But the thing is that I think my timing was incredibly lucky. So back in
Yeah.
5 years ago in Europe, because there was this startup boom with company raising a lot of money on one hand. And on the other hand, I had all this research experience, including my PhD in sociology, which suddenly became a huge asset. So I put it on my CV at this time. Just after 2 job application, I joined LiveMentor, my first company, which is a French company that provides education for entrepreneur trainings, then PayFit. And so, yeah, to me, it was really different because like in the job search, it was so easy to me to get a job in tech, but it was mostly because of this good timing, I think, which is not the case now.
Do you want to get all of your user research questions answered all while hanging out on your couch in sweatpants? No need to join any live webinars and hope that your question gets answered. No need to Google a million different things and sift through some scattered advice that you don't really know is valid or reliable. Not anymore. I know it sounds too good to be true, but I promise it isn't, because if you become a paid Substack subscriber, you get access immediately to a community filled with user researchers that I am in every single day answering questions. Not only can you hang out on your couch, feel less alone as a user researcher, and get all of your questions answered, not only by an expert, but by a bunch of other user researchers with amazing perspectives and experience, you can do all of that on your couch in sweatpants, and I will be alongside there with you every step of the way. So join my paid Substack, get immediate access, and we can relax together solving all of your user research problems. See you there.
But what's fascinating, what I discovered, because as you say, that it might seem completely different, but is that we share the same outputs. Maybe not the outcome, because let's be clear, in the tech, we need to make profits, but we both rely on, that's what I discovered when I was doing this research, that we both rely on understanding human needs and we need to create impact. So these two things are super important. We also use the same research method, interviews, most of the research interviews, observations, surveys, even though they evolve. We also have the same analysis process, whether in humanitarian aid or tech, we are looking for patterns. We need to understand context, bringing different data points together to create a comprehensive picture. It's super important to provide quality inputs. But there is also some differences, and that's why we need to adapt. I would say the main difference is in the approach to quality and risk, which is fundamentally different. In humanitarian work, mistakes can have dramatic consequences because, as I say, lives are literally at stake. And that's why an analysis is done by several researchers. We have teams of researchers dedicated to it. Whereas in the tech, we embrace this fail fast, learn fast culture, which this lean approach with it was quite an adjustment, to be honest, for me. But yeah. And I would say the last difference maybe also it's with the tools that are totally different from the one I used before.
That's amazing. Yeah, I can imagine. So I only got my master's degree, so I did very limited academic research, right? And the adjustment, kind of what you're talking about, of fail fast, learn fast, and do things fast, and everything's fast. Whereas at least my experience with academic research was like, do things slowly, get approval from the board, write 50,000 drafts of a plan and get it approved. And it was just, it was always so slow. So I can imagine that on top of the risk that you
Yeah.
had.
At the same time, when I was working in, for example, in Libya, when you have an attack, suddenly you need to provide an analysis within a week, just a week, and like on the overall country. So you need to work fast. You know, sometimes people think, okay, when you do apply research, of course, it was not in academia, but even in the field, you need to work fast. But it's just the scope which is reduced. You have more resources, more researcher. It doesn't mean you reduce the quality of your work.
Yeah, so you had to maintain the speed, which is probably super helpful for you now as a researcher, because I feel like for us, everything is due like 2 days ago, and so I'm sure that that speed is super helpful for you. And I'm curious in terms of, because you mentioned that there were quite a few similarities with the methods, but how they kind of evolve. And I'm wondering how have research methods like evolved for you, like both stayed the same and changed, I guess.
Yeah, it's quite amusing to see this evolution because when I look back in 2012, yes,
Yeah.
in Ivory Coast, when I was in Ivory Coast, when I was working on my thesis, I was printing my questionnaires one by one, manually encoding 1,200 questionnaires of 6, 7, 8 pages each in Excel, with a one for yes, a two for no, hours of work. For my diary studies, I would leave voice recorders and notebooks to fill in classroom with two teachers and come back a month later to collect them. My interviews, I used to do them in very noisy places, in cars, in corridors, and just with my notebook and pen as tools. I remember also when I needed to make a transcription of all my interviews. It cost me 20 euro per page, which I did for some interviews, but none of them because I was not rich. I was still almost a student, more or less. And I felt guilty when I hired someone to do this task, as if I was cheating. It's interesting to see the parallel with a recent study from Slack, which saw that nearly half of employees today feel uncomfortable admitting they use AI today with their manager. And it's funny because I felt exactly the same thing at that time, whereas it was just normal to do it because it took so many hours. But yes, what's crucial, I think, is to understand that this evolution of tools hasn't changed the essence of research. So we still have the same methods, but it's more the tools that evolves. The fundamental methods like interview, questionnaire, observation, all what we are used to do, we made the same. What changed is how efficiently we can implement them depending on the context, the level of rigor we need to apply. So I think this is the main change, adaptation.
Yeah, and I totally get where you're coming from because I remember I used to transcribe all of my interviews myself, which take hours, hours and hours. And I remember going to a company where we finally had some budget. And the first thing before any big, like, no repository tools or anything like that, the first thing that I thought about was, oh my goodness, if I could just get some hours back from transcription. And we had a transcriber who did all of our interviews because I was the solo researcher and doing so many that I couldn't keep up. But I remember also feeling guilty because I was like, well, this is part of my job. And I'm like letting somebody else do it. And then what if I miss things? And like, what if, what if, what if? So I totally get that guilt.
Yeah, but it's true. There is also prompt, I think, to do this ancestral method, to use this ancestral method tool is when you transcribe everything, of course, it takes a lot of time,
Yeah.
but you really can go back to your interview. You can recall some events that you missed. When you are doing it, you are doing your analysis at the same times. But yes, it doesn't save you time for sure.
Yeah, of course. And I'm curious when it comes to this efficiency and needing to evolve in that way, what are some ways that you have found to make these processes more efficient?
I think today we have a lot of tools, so that's really helpful. We need to use them efficiently. Sometimes we can lose too much time finding which tool could be the best, and at the end we don't save time.
Yeah.
But I think AI is can be really helpful. At least there is something that we need to integrate. I think in our work, there is. I think this evolution is really fascinating, and we cannot skip it and avoid it. When I think back to the hours I spent really manually transcribing everything, I realize really how far we've come. Today, not only I use AI daily, but I've become one of the most active users at PayFit, my company. I'm in the top five, six users out of 700 employees, and we use Dust. Dust is it's a platform where we have multiple assistants, where we can create our own assistant. And usually, I have an assistant with me. I wanted to have an intern, but yes, I think it's to be honest. It wasn't really the plan for someone who was encoding all these things and who still like to read books on with paper and take notes with paper and a pen. But yes, I was quite skeptical about AI at first. Even a few months ago, I was worried about losing the human emotional aspect that is so central to user research, and I'm still worried. I also see the potential when using it in the good way.
Hey everyone, I have been taking some business courses recently and am launching a new membership that's all about how user researchers can become more business savvy, more strategic, and more of a business partner in their organizations. One of the biggest questions that I get asked is, hey, my organization isn't really mature. It has like a low user research maturity level. Please do not let the maturity of your organization dictate your user research career. That's what I did because I was in a lower user research maturity, I kind of let myself stagnate and I didn't really learn new things. And with that, my skills kind of like deteriorated. I lost a lot of time that I could have used to learn really, really important skills because they weren't necessarily applicable to my organization at that time. But guess what? I got fired. And then it didn't really matter what maturity level my organization was at because I was no longer there. And I wished that I had taken the time to learn some of these skills because they would have been applicable at the next places that I went into. I know that it can be hard sometimes and frustrating when you're in a low maturity organization and you want to push things, you want to learn new things, but please, please, please don't let your current organization and their levels of maturity impact your future career because I promise you, you will not be there forever and you will need the skills that you need to learn in the future. Promise, 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 especially with the user research industry changing and us hopefully moving into that more strategic space and operating more as business partners and innovation partners to our organizations. Also, if you want more details on my membership and how to become a little bit more business oriented as a researcher, check out the link that I have and I hope that helps.
Did you listen to Lex Friedman podcast with Dario Amodei? You know, he is the CEO and founder of Anthropic, the company behind Claude AI. It's a 4-hour podcast. They discuss about AI and humanity.
Oh, how cool.
He developed this reassuring vision that humanity isn't in danger. So, of course, his perspective, but if you understand, I recommend it. Or maybe you can just use AI to get the summary. But what really struck me in this discussion was this concept of race to the top. And at PayFit, we are actually applying this idea, or at least that's what I'm trying to implement for my own research. It's not about racing to automate everything, but about elevating our research standards. So the idea is to use AI for time-consuming tasks so we can invest more time in deep analysis, understanding the nuances that are so crucial. So it's not about to focus on to save time, to focus on the quantity, to do more research project, but it's more to deep dive, to focus more on the quality. And recently we had interviews in French that needed to be translated to English. And first, the AI seemed to be an excellent job, but then we discovered that there was some surprising inaccuracies. For example, details were invented to transcription, like the color of our PayFit Copilot widget. That they say, okay, there is a violet Copilot widget, which he never said, because I remember during this
Yeah.
interview, I verified it. And also during the interview and during the analysis, we noticed that some hesitation words, even the notes and observation, were just removed, leading to false insights, not only incomplete, but
Yeah.
also false in my case because of shortcuts analysis. And this is exactly what the Nielsen Norman Group study showed recently, that shows that AI misses about 30% of critical insights for in usability tests. I think there is also research from Microsoft Research who demonstrated this way in their study of 100 user sessions, and they show that AI excels at identifying simple patterns but struggle to understand deeper motivation. And there is also another study from Spotify, an experience that revealed that AI was analyzing that they did this experience with comparing AI analysis and the human observation, and they revealed that the most valuable insights were from the human observation. So my approach with AI is to handle transcription word for word without inventing anything. I use it to deepen my analysis, not to replace it. I try to maintain as much as possible some rigor and human control. And I systematically cross-reference different data sources. So what this Race to the Top is really about, it's using AI not to do more with less, but do better by freeing up our expertise for what really matters, which are deep understanding of user and their needs.
Yeah, I love that because I think doing more isn't really the answer, right? Because when we just do more, do more, do more, we end up overloading people with information and we lose sight, I think, of what is important. So if you can research, because let's say you can research anything and everything because of AI, you're going to completely lose touch with what is actually important to focus on because you're like, well, we can do everything. But I like how you say it's about freeing up the time so that you can deepen your analysis or the things that matter more that get you better information and deeper information to help your teams, not a broader sense, but a deeper sense of it. And I think that's really a powerful way to use AI. And so I'm wondering in terms of because you had mentioned there are 700 people at your org and you have a small research team. And I guess we can also tie this to AI in a way, but like how do you go about optimizing your team to work across such a large organization and make sure that you can impact, I guess, as many people as you need to?
So yeah, that's a good question also to see how we can adapt in research. So everything is about adaptability. So yeah, we are at PayFit. We are a team of just two researchers for a company. So yes, we are more or less 700 people. So we are two researchers, me and my manager. What's interesting is that we developed two main ways of working. We work as either advisor or partner. As an advisor, we help teams shape their research, so reviewing their scope, method, and analysis. So we are just reviewer and product manager, designer, product marketer, they do it, we review it. And then we have this partner role where we lead the research ourselves. So it doesn't mean working alone. We always work in small group. At least I like to work in small group of three, but our involvement in this type of role and involvement is much deeper. This flexible way of working lets us switch between projects based on strategic needs. We might be leading one key project while advising several others. So it's it's like being able to speak different languages. We choose the right one for each situation. And what's really important, I learned this in humanitarian work too, is that impact isn't just about the business or user or beneficiaries. It's also about how we work with our stakeholders. Some people prefer, for example, talking things through, other wants written reports, some needs to see video clips from user sessions, others just want quick summaries. So we are constantly, as researchers, adjusting how we share our insight. But it's super important to keep that in mind. And most of the time, it's us who have to adapt, not the other stakeholders. And we always change teams. It's never the same. Every project is different. So what I do is a small focused team. To me, the 3 people is the best way of working, the most efficient. We do regular but flexible check-in with our weekly, but yeah, it's important to remain flexible because PMs can have suddenly other priority release or I don't know, an urgency. So my role, I consider it has to be flexible to them. And of course, I try to have different ways of sharing insight based on what work best for each team. So I really try to adapt so that I can have a bigger impact. It's not about doing everything, especially when we are just two, but it's more about knowing when to lead, when to guide, how to share what we learn in ways that really connect with people. Because at the end, what we want is to have the most impact as possible.
Yeah. And I think it's really cool that you've come up with those models of advising and partnering and understanding, okay, when is it that we advise? When is it that we partner? And how do we use that to help and collaborate in the best way possible? And I think that that's a really powerful model for people to think about. And so with that in mind, we're actually coming up to the end of our time right now, which is unreal. It flies by.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, based on what we talked about, do you have, like one piece of wisdom that you would like to tell the audience to for them to walk away with today?
One piece of advice. So I will need to synthesize, which is super important also as a researcher. But yeah, I think that if we have to remind something is that adaptability should become your superpower, but you need to use it strategically. For example, I would share maybe 4 practical tips to use it strategically. First, start small. Begin with small experiments. When trying something new like AI, for example, test it first on low stakes projects, test your prompt, what works best, test your transcription, and document what works and what doesn't. Then, second, know your audience. Pay attention on how different teams prefer to receive information. As I said, some people need to see videos and others prefer just short summaries, just so know your audience. Build strong partnership instead of trying to work with everyone. Just focus on building deep relationships with a few key people. Meet regularly with them, understand their challenge, involve them also early in your research process. And last but not least, stay curious and connected. I think this one is really important. Surround yourself with other researchers, join communities, listen to podcasts, read about new practices, read. Every research has unique experiences to share, it's true, but just don't copy what others do. Think about how to adapt their method and their experience to your specific situation.
I love that. That's like the perfect place to end because I super agree. Don't copy and paste. It's never going to work out.
Yeah, and stay curious. It's important to be on the page. Also with AI, you can skip it. I think every researcher, most of the researchers are very skeptical, but we can skip it. If you understand it, you can step back and use it in the good way.
Absolutely. Amazing. Well, and Charlotte, thank you so much for your time today. That was super helpful and filled with a lot of amazing information that I know that our audience is going to absolutely love and be able to take away, and some really cool ideas with like the different models and the tips that you shared. So thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you, Nikki. Thanks for having. And yeah, don't forget, remember that it's not about being perfect. It's about making progress. It's something also I learned with my experience. I believe that the best approach often comes when we combine our experience with new perspective while staying true to your research principle, our research principle. But yes, thanks so much, Nikki, for having me. Yes, I'm always happy to continue this conversation with you on LinkedIn. So don't hesitate to contact me.
Amazing. Yes. And all of the references that we made will be in the show notes as well. So definitely check out those links. But I also just want to quickly thank the audience for their time today. Thank you all so much for tuning in and listening, and we'll talk again soon.